Hi, everyone. Today I'm talking to Wes Wheless of Develop My IP about the importance of niche work for solopreneurs and others. Wes, you're a solopreneur who helps new solo consultants bottle their secret sauce. Can you give a quick explanation of that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, good to see you, Damian, by the
Yeah,
way.
great to see you.
Yeah. So I think you and I both know there's this big kind of influx of people that are leaving traditional corporate careers and going into self-employment, specifically independent consulting. The thing is that can be a difficult transition to make, I think mainly because a lot of us aren't used to selling our expertise on a daily basis. So that's where I come in. I help people identify their niche and become known for it. So I do that in two different sprints, one-on-one. One sprint is called the Niche Finder, which is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's over the course of a few sessions, we triangulate where your unique expertise can meet the market. And then the second one is called the IP Builder. IP is meaning intellectual property. And that's where we know your niche. Now let's think about all that expertise that you have to solve that particular problem. Let's turn that into frameworks and visual assets that I call intellectual headshots. So that's the second sprint.
Great. For those who hear the term, niching, but don't necessarily know how it applies to being a solopreneur, a solo consultant. Can you describe how it works?
Yeah, sure. So niching is just another word in my view of specialization. And by the way, you can say niche or niche, like depending on where you're from. So it really is just about finding your corner of the market. And so to do that, it's answering two questions. It's kind of who do you help and how, or if you want to do it the other way around, it's kind of what problem do you solve and for who. And so with either of the ways that you take that, then you can see that there's two pieces to it. There's the who and the what. I think that if you answer both of those questions very broadly, like you could say, even if you were like a marketer, you could say, okay, well, I help any company with any marketing problem. Like that puts you in the classification squarely of a generalist. We call it a generalist consultant. If you get more specific on both the who and the what, that kind of leans you into niche or specialist territory. And as you do that, then it's a little bit easier to become known for what you do, given that you have like a target of the type of problem that you solve.
You've written and talked about 5 main benefits. Can you give a brief summary of these?
Yeah, the first one is it's a concentrated pipeline. So as opposed to, if I had a very broad or generalist approach, I'd probably need to be running all over town, different conferences, trying to speak everywhere, really appeal to a lot of different audiences. So when you start to narrow down to one particular type of client and one particular type of problem, you can be very selective about where you market yourself, and it can buy you back a lot of time and a lot of scale in that process. So that's the first one. The second one is market affinity. So as you're talking to one audience over and over again, that audience or that community gets to know you. They get to know your name. They get to know the type of work that you do. Maybe you have a signature framework or something like that. Then people start talking about you and then referring people, and that all builds up in a way that wouldn't really happen if you were spreading yourself really thin across a lot of different communities. That leads into the next one. The third one is service refinement. So now as you get into serving the same type of client over and over again, you can start to kind of carve off parts of your services that aren't high value or that are difficult to deliver, which then leaves you with a really crisp service, really high ROI and high value for the client. That leads to the fourth one, which is pricing power. So if you have a really dialed in service that over time you've refined into something that's super high value, then that gives you the ability to ask for higher rates. And then the last one kind of ties it all together, and it's just what I call the expertise loop, meaning that for every time you go through an iteration of attracting and serving a client, then that sets you up better for the next one. And that's something that is unique to a niche strategy as opposed to a generalist one. All of those benefits that I just mentioned, these are not one-off benefits. They're compounding benefits over time. My specialty has always been in extracting and monetizing other people's expertise, and I've done that in a lot of different ways as a ghostwriter, as a course developer, content strategist for tech startups, like just a lot of different ways to do that. And so my clients were very varied. It was, startups, it was executives, it was aspiring thought leaders, it was a lot of different things. But, a couple of years ago, I made the intentional decision to narrow down and say, you know what, I think that I can help solo consultants exclusively and gain some scale that way. And it just sounded like a lot more interesting problem to me and an urgent one. I'm very, very familiar with the need to be able to identify and articulate your expertise. And so as I've done that, then that, it wasn't an easy thing to do. I had to basically say goodbye to a bunch of clients and start turning down proposals and all of that. But it was done as a long-term decision to start really diving deep on one particular area. And so then that started to inform the type of content I was putting out. I started a newsletter that's specifically for solo consultants. And as I'm doing that, then I'm just getting deeper and deeper into this world and the specific problem for independent consultants. And so my expertise is deepening, my reputation is deepening. I get invited to more things like this, and interesting for I knew about a niche strategy intellectually and academically, but then to see it actually unfold of that, okay, yeah, when you focus down, that it does actually come back to you. It's been really great to see.
Interesting, and also really admirable, because there's a bit more risk. The smaller the client gets, the security kind of goes down a little bit.
Well, let me say that it was a very considered decision. I had 3 different lanes that I was thinking about going down, and I went and did interviews and asked people kind of about willingness to pay and those kinds of things, and ended up making my decision. But there are other pieces that maybe wouldn't rise to the surface so quickly. So I'll give an example. When I was working for SaaS startups and building content and IP based on their executives' knowledge, there are some, it sounds like really sexy work, but at the same time, there are other things like, okay, well, I probably got knocked around on the schedule a lot. And we're oh, they're busy with these priorities. Then all of a sudden, then our project expands an extra 2 months. And it's not something that we renegotiate in terms of rate. It's just oh, we can't get around to this until then. And so there's a lot of things that kind of go out of my control as a solopreneur when I attach myself to a larger company. I think the same goes with kind of the sales process. Is the decision maker. There were multiple decision makers when I was selling to corporate clients. You've probably experienced that yourself. And then when I'm dealing with individuals or solopreneurs, it's an individual decision maker. Yes, of course, there's a trade-off with willingness to pay. And I did make a very intentional decision to be working with new consultants that I know probably are in a spot where they might be even pre-revenue. That's something that has continued to impact how I think about pricing and how I think about even the structure of my services. That, I mentioned I'm in a sprint model. That's a direct choice based on the fact that someone in that position is more likely to hire me in a 2-week sprint as opposed to a 3-month engagement that looks like a coaching engagement or something like that. So yeah, it is a lot of trade-offs. And that is kind of what we work through in the niche finder is who do you want to work with? What do you want the sales process to look like? What room do you want to be in? What conversations do you want to be having on a daily basis? Just all of that goes into this.
Really, really interesting. We touched on this a bit already, but why are some people from your experiences reluctant, even if they are, I'm a generalist, right? And mm-hmm. There's a certain reluctance I have with getting too niche. Why broadly are people reluctant to niche down?
Yeah, well, there are a ton of reasons. I've heard from a lot of people, probably hundreds at this point, and I'll say that the resistance to niche down seems to be pretty universal. If I can narrow it down or kind of distill it down to core reasons, I think it's all something around fear. And I think that the fear manifests in a lot of different ways. Maybe you can tell me if any of these are what you feel as well. But the first one that comes to mind is there's fear of choosing the quote unquote wrong niche, and that there's just not going to be demand at the other side of the rainbow, so to speak. That's something that, that's a legitimate fear, but it's something that can be mitigated as you do research, as you go out and talk to people, as you start to craft offers and shop them out in the market. You can start to, triangulate your way into something that brings you the right level of demand. So that's one. The other one is there's this fear of boredom, particularly folks that are just leaving corporate. What do you mean, broke out of this box and now you want put me in this other little box? And what I say to that is, and it's come true time and time again when I talk to clients and other fellow consultants, is that the deeper you go into one specific problem, the more interesting it gets. I know it's been my experience is like, yes, I niche down to just help solo consultants find their footing. But now it turns out that almost with all the clients that I work with, there's very few that have domain overlap. And so I'm learning constantly about all these different areas of expertise.
Really cool.
And so it's kept me like more activated than I think I've ever been in my career. And I think maybe the last one I'll mention is there's this fear of like closing doors. I think this is the real like FOMO. And this one's a really natural one because you're going out and you're doing something new and you want to give yourself, you think you're giving yourself the best chance by just saying, I'm open to any kind of work. I don't want to shut the door on potential clients or potential business. I'm probably dealing with a somewhat short runway. And so you don't want to close those doors. And I think the biggest paradox that new solo consultants need to internalize, which is that the more you specialize, the more valuable and the more in demand you become. And I've just seen that time and time again with the type of clients that I work with.
Some fields can become really competitive, seemingly overnight. During the pandemic, there was a big increase in self-employed workers and solopreneurs, and also a big increase in coaches, right? Business, life coaches. What's your advice on pivoting if somebody goes really niche and suddenly that area, that corner becomes really saturated?
Yeah. And I think the coaching example is a really good one. You do see kind of this major influx I've seen like in executive coaches. I would say kind of maybe more generally, I would say that specialization or a niche strategy is actually a bit of your protection against that. And so you could think of, I talked about all those benefits and how they compound over time. So as soon as you get into kind of like barreling into a niche, then all of that is going to start working for you. So if you do see an influx of other people joining kind of your party, then there is that part where like, okay, you've been there longer, you're building up this reputation, you're probably getting deeper and deeper into kind of your own IP, methodology, infrastructure, all of that. And so you probably have some built-in protection. If you are really seeing like an influx in your exact corner of the market and maybe it's giving you some pricing pressure or something like that, you can take that as a signal to niche down even further. So, let's say you're working with, let's go back to the coaching example. Say you're an executive coach for CEOs of SaaS companies. Let's just stay there. And probably over time, you've developed some approach for them. You could go even deeper and say, okay, well, let me look back at my last, 5, 10 clients, however you've had so far. Which ones have been your best fit clients? And could that be a new kind of subset and you go only for that specific type? I think that brings to light this like important realization that as solopreneurs, there's a cap to the number of people that we can serve. And so, we're not looking for hundreds, thousands of clients, probably looking, a coach is probably on the high end. They're probably looking for 20 to 30 clients. And that really is dependent on how you structure your services. If you're a corporate consultant, doing 3 to 4 month projects, you're probably looking at 4 to 6 clients per year. So you're not needing that many to make your goal for the year, and so it's okay to go and niche down even further. There will be demand there, and that whole paradox is the more that you bucket yourself into something specific, there'll be more people that are coming your way with that exact problem.
What's your advice for generalists doing really well wearing multiple hats? Can one half niche?
I love it. I love the hedge. No, actually, I think that it's well, I had someone come with this exact question, a subscriber to the newsletter, and he was saying, I have a full pipeline, I have plenty of work, but I'm still kind of in this generalist boat. And my answer to that is, if you have enough work, you're probably niched enough. It is probably an easy way to think about it. I think the other thing to realize is that specialization or niching is a spectrum. You could probably always get more niche. But if you go back to what I was talking about, the who and the what, you're already probably somewhere like halfway in between the broad and narrow on the what part, and maybe you've like let the who expand a bit. And that's totally fine if you're feeling like you have enough work. I think what I would suggest is a couple things. Because I do hear from people that like the variety, who like to be able to be very reactive. If you get the random referral and it sounds interesting to you, you want to feel comfortable taking it. So what I would do is one is do this type of audit, like I was just alluding, like go through your the last few clients or maybe your last year of clients and figure out if which of that work have you really liked and which of that work have you not. And what would happen if you just stopped taking that work? What would be the impact to your revenue? More importantly, what would be the impact to you? Like, what time could you get back? And could you apply that to other types of perhaps maybe like higher return work? The other thing that I would mention, and this is something that usually provides like the relief valve or a snorkel for folks who are a bit tentative about specialization, which is, I like to think of it as give yourself an A side and a B side. So like your A side can be, all right, this is where I'm headed from a niche perspective, and like put some boundaries around that, and then build your strategy and your revenue goals and your client acquisition goals around that A side. Carve out 10, 15, 20%, however much you want of your capacity to be able to take on that random work that comes along, and just know that anything that you earn off of that B side is kind of gravy on top of what you've made off the A side. I think doing that it feels less constricting for folks, just knowing that you've given yourself that liberty, because at the end of the day, you know and I know we got into this to be able to do the type of work that we want, and we're in a very unique situation to be able to only take on the work that we really want to. So I wouldn't say like, once you set a niche, then that's it, and like don't take on anything else. Give yourself the liberty to take on what you want.
Really, really cool. Like, that was the first time I heard A side and B side, not in relation to music.
Well, it is a cassette or a record analogy, so I might be dating myself there. Who knows, it'll make sense to everyone.
I'm a big fan. Yeah. I'm a fan of B-sides. Wes, thank you so much. Any final thoughts or just anything else you want to add here?
Well, I think the only thing to wrap this up is deciding on your niching or specialization strategy is just the first step. Like, you can almost, if you really wanted to, kind of overnight, you could decide, okay, this is who I'm going to serve and I'm going to solve this problem. That's the start of a specialization strategy. You then need to go and continue to march down that road and do the things that I've been mentioning. So like figure out what your unique approach to solving this problem is, document that into frameworks, just really insert yourself into this world, and I think that is what will start to really compound over time and start to have people respect you for the expert that you are.
Wes, thank you so much. Thank you for your time and your insights. I think this is really valuable.
No, thanks so much for having me. It's good to see you, Damian.